For tuning into this short video about the Constitutional Convention and the decisions that were made at that convention. Now, this Constitutional Convention was a bit controversial for the time. Originally, the framers of the Constitution were meeting together to discuss changing the Articles of Confederation. Now, you may recall in class when we discussed the Articles of Confederation, there were a lot of different flaws. And for example, they couldn't create a national army, and they couldn't create a national currency, and they couldn't essentially pay off their debts. So there were a lot of problems with the Articles of Confederation, and when they got together for this Constitutional Convention, there was really too many problems to solve with just changing the articles. Many felt like a new constitution had to be formed. And the people that attended this convention tended to be the wealthier people in society from large cities, planters, merchants, prominent politicians at the time. Rhode Island itself didn't attend at all. So they didn't even have every single state in attendance at the Constitutional Convention. Rhode Island felt like, as a small state, they'd be giving up some power if they changed the Constitution. Under the Articles, one state has a lot of power. Now, this isn't to say that all 55 men were there at the exact same time. Many left frequently, many came late to the meetings. Ben Franklin was very elderly at the time, and he only attended, part-time, even though he was from Philadelphia. You had people that got angry with the convention and ended up leaving early, storming out, like Alexander Hamilton. And really, in the end, not all that did attend a lot even agreed with the new Constitution. So not everyone even signed on. And they met in Philadelphia in secret because really, suddenly changing your government is often seen as a treasonous behavior. And also, they didn't really want a lot of commentary from the news media, from the public. They were kind of discouraging the common folk from being all panicky that these 55 men were changing the Constitution. They wanted to, get their ideas, put them in a concise format, and then share it with the people for discussion. They didn't want any misconceptions to get out there. Now, the 55 people, I said they didn't agree on everything. Oftentimes, they had to come up with a compromise. For example, they had to compromise over slavery. There were many people that spoke out against slavery, many people that spoke out for slavery. They had to compromise over the executive branch. There were many people that wanted an extremely powerful executive, a strong president, a monarch. But there were many people that wanted something different, a president that would have a lot of checks, that would be restricted, or no president at all. Certainly, there were a few people that felt that we did not need an executive in the United States. Probably the biggest contention at the convention was congressional representation. They knew there had to be a Congress. And remember, under the Articles of Confederation, they were just unicameral. They had one entity, and each state had one vote. And it took very little states to essentially derail any discussion of big changes. Now, Virginia arrived early. They wanted to be the first ones in attendance at this Constitutional Convention. And their proposal was to have a bicameral legislature, so to have two houses, and to have it proportional by state representation. When I say proportional by state representation, I mean that larger states get more votes, smaller states get less votes. And when I say larger or smaller, I mean population. So a state like Virginia was huge for the time. They had a lot of people in their population. States like Massachusetts had a lot of people there. States like New York had a lot of people there. And so they would get more votes. More people you're representing, more votes in Congress, was the idea from Virginia. They felt it was only fair. You have more people living here, you should get more power. Now, New Jersey arrived, and they were considered a small state. And New Jersey wanted the powers to stay relatively similar to the Articles of Confederation. They preferred a unicameral Congress, so one house of Congress, and equal representation. They did like the idea of having multiple votes per state, though. So New Jersey would get 2 votes, Virginia would get 2 votes, New York would get 2 votes, but everyone would be equal. Now, of course, Virginia hated this plan because There's a ton more people in Virginia than New Jersey, so why should they have the same amount of votes as New Jersey? This could have easily ended up dividing our nation into potentially multiple countries or leaving us with the dysfunctional Articles of Confederation. But Connecticut proposes a compromise, often referred to as the Great Compromise. And that Great Compromise is basically have a little of both. You have the House of Representatives that is proportional by state population. California is the largest state in the U.S., and they have 50 some representatives. And the smallest states like Montana and uh, Maine and Rhode Island, and North Dakota, and South Dakota would have a whole lot less, possibly one, possibly a little more, but they wouldn't have as large of an influence in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, each state is granted 2 seats. So Wisconsin has 2 senators. California has 2 senators. Rhode Island has 2 senators. Hawaii has 2 senators. Alaska has 2 senators. They are all the same. So we get a little bit of the Virginia plan and a little bit of the New Jersey plan to create our modern congressional makeup. Now, the other major issue that came up during the Constitutional Convention was slavery. And there were many people that wanted slavery outlawed by the Constitution. And there were many that wanted it protected by the Constitution. And what ended up happening is they ended up having a compromise. There wouldn't be anything to outlaw slavery. They would not get a constitution passed that would outlaw slavery. And the South, they wanted more than that. They wanted to maintain slavery and to also have slaves count as people when it comes to representation. So a state like Virginia not only has more people, but it also has a lot of slaves. And then it would have more representation in that House of Representatives. Now, Congress came up with the Constitutional Convention came up with a compromise. It's called the Three-Fifths Compromise. And it counts all enslaved people as essentially 3/5 of a person. So those states in the South with slavery could essentially get more representation in Congress. But another element of the compromise was that population count would also count for taxes. So those states in the South would get potentially more power in Congress, more power in the House of Representatives, but they would also face more taxes for having more slaves. They also agreed that the slave trade was something that could be stopped eventually. They agreed that after 20 years, past the passage of the Constitution, the slave trade could be abolished. Now, when it came to voting, they also weren't exactly sure what to do. Some states wanted women to be able to vote. Some states wanted freed African Americans to be able to vote. Some states wanted different age requirements or property requirements. Maybe you have to own property to be able to vote. So there wasn't really a good compromise for this. They decided to leave it up to the states. So states can have different voting requirements. Now, of course, this is eventually going to change with amendments to the Constitution. Numerous amendments have made it so voting is open to more people. It's expanded our democracy to more individuals. Also, competing with that idea from the Articles, under the Articles, the Congress struggled economically because they could not tax people. They could not force states to give them money. Basically, Congress gave economic power to, or the Constitutional Convention gave economic power to Congress, trying to solve some of the problems under the Articles of Confederation. And they went further. In the Constitution, there are some freedoms and protections for the individual. For example, in the Constitution, it says that the U.S. government cannot suspend habeas corpus. And habeas corpus it's a Latin phrase, and it essentially means that you can't be imprisoned without knowing why or being given a trial per se. So suspending habeas corpus would allow you to throw people in prison and not tell them or give them a trial or give them any rights. Habeas corpus was seen as something that the founding fathers, the framers of this Constitution, wanted protected. They wanted to make sure it was in the Constitution that you could not just suspend habeas corpus whenever you wanted. That there had to be uh, a very good reason. They do outline a way for Congress to do so, but not allowing the president to do so was key. They also banned something called bills of attainder. And a bill of attainder was something that would be used from the UK, so something they remember from the British monarchy. And essentially, it allowed for Congress to make someone guilty. So a bill of attainder would be, let's say they pass a law, and that law says that John Smith is guilty of murder. There's no trial, it's just making him guilty via a law. Probably something we do not want our Congress doing. We leave the legal system to courts and juries. Now, ex post facto laws, sometimes one of the more confusing phrases in the Constitution. This is a protection for people as well. It essentially is a protection for future laws. So let's say that Congress passes a law tomorrow that says that Mr. Glodowski cannot make video lectures and post them on YouTube or whatever. And they make that law apply to today. They can't essentially, make a law apply backwards to a time when people did whatever that law is restricting. So let's say, I don't know. Let's say tomorrow the U.S. government makes a law that says it's illegal for Marshfield students to sit in their desks in high school. And they say anyone that did this yesterday also faces that penalty. Did you know today that you were going to face a penalty tomorrow for something you had no idea was going to be illegal? No, you didn't. You had no idea. So it kind of, it seems like a strange thing to have to make a law about, but people were trying to pass laws to penalize people backwards. Last two things, they certainly outlined what counted as treason because they wanted to protect themselves. During the Revolution, many of them did treasonous behavior against the British government. And secondly, they wanted to make sure religious qualifications were not allowed. So you couldn't say every senator had to be Christian, or to be in the House of Representatives you had to be Jewish. There could be no requirements like that. Whereas under the British Crown, the Church of England or the Anglican Church was a common requirement. Feel free to ask me about any of these personal freedoms because I know they're often very difficult. So don't be afraid to ask me a few questions about those or for some more examples in class. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day.